Well, firstly, thank you, Professor Imber. Ephraim's well known in Australia as a commentator. He's been to Australia numerous occasions, and he always makes a great contribution to public debate and information about developments in the Middle East whenever he comes. Let me talk for about 10 minutes on an issue that perhaps would surprise some people in this audience, the issue of terrorism and Australia. And I think even for most Australians, we really, quite honestly, thought it was an issue that affected most other countries in the world, not our own, until recently. However, there's been, as I say up there, 35 prosecutions and 26 terrorist convictions since 2003. Most of that activity has been in our largest capital cities, Sydney and Melbourne. 2/3 of the actual and foiled attacks against Australia have actually occurred in the last 12 months. Now, we have not in Australia ever, thank goodness, had to experience any large-scale mass casualty attacks. But as I say, we've had 3 attacks in the last 10 months. We've had 6 potential attacks disrupted, including, and I'm sure it made the news in Israel, this case of a 14-year-old child in Britain giving instructions to an Australian about mounting terrorist attacks, and that UK child, let's be honest, has been convicted for life. What's happened in Australia, if I could summarise it, is that in the 80s and 90s, there were a number of large-scale terrorist plots that were disrupted. 2 principal targets were the main sporting ground in Australia, in Melbourne, called the Melbourne Cricket Ground, and another attack that was foiled was on a main army base. What's happened now, however...
Why are they attacking Australia? What are they having in Australia?
Okay, we'll get there. So what's happened in the last 10 months? As I say, we've had three attacks on Australian soil. In December, in Sydney, in the largest city in Australia, in a cafe right in the heart of the city, you had a siege hostage incident. An Iranian who is well known to our security agencies, but unfortunately no one actually predicted that he would do what he did. And as I say, 2 people were killed, including the terrorist. The next attack, the previous to that, was in Melbourne, where just a young person, 18-year-old Afghan, attacked 2 police officers, and that person he attempted to stab the police officers, and he was also killed. The most recent attack, just last month, occurred at a police station in Sydney, Parramatta, where you had a 15-year-old born in Iran, interestingly of Iraqi Kurdish descent, where he shot a police civilian accountant before he himself was shot dead. Now, when the incident first occurred, there was a lot of media coverage saying he was a lone wolf. Well, since the shooting, we know more about this guy, this kid, and he was certainly operating in a very sophisticated extremist milieu, including having a very strong online presence on jihadi websites. My institute recently published a report which you can download on our website called Gen Y Jihadists. And on that slide, I've tried to summarise some of the features of what we found when we looked at our local Australian jihadis, issues like a sense of injustice, need for identity, and so forth. And interestingly, the nationality and background, more than half of these people were born in Australia, or certainly spent most of their life raised in Australia. There's a wide variety of ethnic and family backgrounds, but as you can see from that slide, the Lebanese people feature prominently in those people in Australia that have been either convicted of terrorist offences or have been caught up in current investigations. Our security agency, our equivalent of Shin Bet, called ASIO, currently has 400 active investigations, counter-terrorism investigations. That's a 100% increase than we've had since last year. The principal feature, I would say, of the increase in these investigations is the age of the people that our security agencies are investigating. In fact, just before we came here, one of our chief security people said that a 12-year-old was currently on their radar. So the age is getting younger. And what the police in Australia, I'm not sure how it translates into Israel in Israeli, but what they call the speed between the flash and the bang, that is the conception of someone thinking about an attack and actually mounting the attack, is getting shorter and shorter. Remember I said that a lot of our plots were larger scale, operating on bigger targets. Now the trend is younger people, and the time for between thinking and mounting the attack is getting shorter. And as you can also see in that slide, the profile, social media profile, and active use of these local jihadis is very, very high. Now, one of the biggest issues that Australia is facing is the so-called foreign fighter issue. Australians, sad to say, one of our biggest exports at the moment, not really a great income earner, one of our biggest exports is actually foreign fighters. Per capita, sad to say, Australia has the highest foreign fighter exports in the world. We've had 120 Australians travelling to Syria and Iraq. Now, when the Afghan war was on, we had about 30 Australians go to fight in Afghanistan. 25 returned, and 19 of those people were involved in terrorist offences when they came back. So you can see where we're going with this, that what's concerning the Australian authorities is that when these Australians come back from fighting in Iraq and Syria, they'll have the skill set, the jihadi mindset to mount attacks domestically. I've said there that there's 120 sympathisers that are supporting these groups, people financially. Over 300 people have been offloaded from our airports, flights from Australia going overseas to fight. And I have to say, when I talk to most Australians about this, they always say, well, why not let them go? Why do we try and stop them? We can talk about that. But that is a question a lot of Australians, I think, ask. Why don't we just let them go? They burn their passports, most of them anyway, and about 30 have come back. Yeah. So one of the ways we've tried to do to stop them is foreign fighter legislation, and I won't go through some of the principal points except to note that the Foreign Minister has declared two areas, Mosul and Raqqa in Syria, as areas where if Australians go there, they are automatically assumed to be committing an offence unless they can present evidence of why they're there. We've introduced numerous travel restrictions. Around 120 passports have been confiscated. We've introduced other sorts of movement controls. Obviously, we've been looking at welfare benefits and social security benefits, cancelling those for people who want to go and join the fight. Perhaps most controversially, Australia has passed legislation to strip the citizenship of those foreign fighters that have dual citizenship. It was quite controversial. There was a lot of debate. But I have to say it really only solves half the problem because, 40% have dual nationality, the rest of them have only sole Australian citizenship. Now, stripping citizenship of sole Australians has all sorts of legal policy implications to do with making people stateless and so forth. But let me just say that this recent legal move from the government to strip citizenship of those dual citizens has been quite popular. We're also looking at issues like lowering the age of control orders that restrict suspects' movements and so forth from 16 to 14. Remember, I said the age of these people is getting younger and younger. So what are we trying to do to stop this extremism spreading in Australia? I've said there in that slide, you can see there are 4 broad areas: prevention, early detection, challenging the narrative, Islamist narrative, and intervention and diversion. I have to tell you quite honestly, and I know we've got people from the Australian Embassy, but at the risk of perhaps being a little bit provocative, I think we're just taking baby steps really in Australia to try and deal with this problem. There is some efforts being made, particularly around intervention programs where instead of targeting whole Muslim communities, we're trying to work out who are the most vulnerable of these youth and provide, mental health support, social health support and so forth. But it's really early days. And my judgment, quite honestly, having looked at this issue in Australia, is that the problem is getting worse, not better. The problem's getting worse, and you can measure that any way you like in terms of security investigations, in terms of number of passports being cancelled and so forth. The problem's getting worse. So let me just finish on what can Australia learn from your country about how to deal with this issue of Islamist extremism and homegrown violent extremism. Well, firstly, of course, statement of the obvious, our circumstances. 1 minute, Ephraim, I've nearly finished. But, you've given me 5, okay. Very generous. Our circumstances, of course, are vastly different. The size of our country, the experience of threats from this country to our own, of course, is vastly different. And I think, having been to your country several times now, I think the attitudes toward security, protective security and so forth are different in Israel than they are to Australia. I think we're more relaxed, if you see what I mean, about security. But having said that, I think there are a number of areas, and hopefully in the dialogue that we'll have, that Ephraim's generously organised later this week, we will discuss some of these issues. But I think some of the areas that I believe we can learn from your country is just the way you've gone about analysing the threat. I still don't think in Australia we understand it. I was astonished to receive a booklet that our government had recently put out about radicalisation in schools. It was designed for school teachers and educational authorities, but it did not once in that booklet mention Islamist jihadism. Not once. So you can't deal with the problem unless you actually recognise what the problem is. Israel, I think, I can be contradicted here, but my sense is that over the years, having fought terrorists for a long time, you're very good at fusing information, interagency cooperation, information sharing. again, I mean, the area of resilience and how to make a population stronger in the face of threats and being able to bounce back, I think they're obvious areas where Australia can learn. And one of the areas that, having been here on a previous trip where I had a bit of a look at your health preparedness, I think that's an area where I think medical response to terrorism and the way your health system seems to move very quickly is an area that I think Australia can learn as well. So Ephraim, I think our circumstances are different in Australia to Israel, but I think there are many areas that we can usefully derive lessons and from your country. Thank you.